I pulled up to the cabin around noon. The drive had been longer than I expected, 6 hours from Denver, the last two on roads that got progressively narrower and rougher. My old Toyota pickup handled it fine, though. I'd packed it to the roof with everything I thought I'd need for the next 6 months. Clothes, food, my laptop, and more books than I probably should have brought. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by tall pines. It looked exactly like the photos from the real estate listing. A sturdy log structure with a covered porch across the front, a metal roof, and a stone chimney climbing up one side. Nothing fancy, but it was mine now. All mine. No neighbors for at least a mile in any direction. I shut off the engine and just sat there for a minute, taking it in. The silence hit me first. No traffic noise, no people talking, no hum of air conditioners or distant sirens. Just wind in the pines and a few birds calling. I'd been living in the city too long. Forgot what real quiet sounded like. I grabbed my keys and hopped out. The air was cold and crisp, late October in the Rockies. I zipped my jacket and walked up to the front door. The wooden steps creaked under my boots. The key turned easily in the lock, and I pushed the door open. The inside was simple and clean. One main room with the kitchen area on the right, a small living room space with a wood stove on the left. A short hallway led to what I knew was the bedroom and bathroom. The previous owner had left some furniture, a table with 4 chairs, a worn leather couch, a coffee table, and a desk by the front window. Perfect spot for writing. I'd bought this place for one reason, to finish my novel. 2 years of working on it in my apartment between shifts at the marketing agency hadn't gotten me far enough. I needed space, quiet, and no distractions. 6 months in this cabin would do it. Had to. I headed back to the truck and started unloading. Took 4 trips to get the food inside, 2 more for clothes and books. The laptop and my writing notes came last, most important cargo. By the time I finished, I was sweating despite the cold. I was hauling in the last box, extra blankets and some winter gear, when something white caught my eye. A piece of paper had fallen from the inside of the front door when I'd propped it open. Must have been tucked into the frame somehow. I set down the box and picked it up. It was a single sheet of printer paper, folded in half. When I opened it, I found a typed note with a handwritten signature at the bottom. To the new owner, it started. My name is Rowan Gibson. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've purchased my cabin. There are things you need to know about this place. For your safety, please follow these rules. I frowned. Weird way to welcome someone. The note continued with a numbered list. 1. Never leave the cabin between 1:12 a.m. and 1:26 a.m. 2. If you hear knocking during those times, do not answer the door. Do not look out the windows. 3. Leave a small pile of salt on the front porch every Sunday night. 4. If you see a woman in white in the forest, return to the cabin immediately. Do not speak to her. 5. During storms, remain inside with the curtains drawn. 6. If you feel like you're being watched while outside, go inside immediately. The note ended with, I know these sound strange, but they will keep you safe. I wish someone had told me sooner. Good luck. Rowan Gibson. I read it twice, then laughed out loud. The sound echoed in the empty cabin. What the hell? I said to no one. I remembered what the real estate agent had told me about Gibson. He'd lived alone in the cabin for years after his wife disappeared. Died 6 months ago. Heart attack, they thought. A neighbor found him when he didn't show up for their weekly supply run into town. The agent mentioned Gibson had gotten eccentric in his final years. Said something about dementia, or maybe just the isolation getting to him. This note confirmed it. Salt on the porch? A woman in white? Sounded like the guy had lost it. I crumpled the note and tossed it toward the trash can in the kitchen. It missed, landing on the floor. I'd get it later. Right now, I needed to finish unpacking. The rest of the day went by quick. I put food away, made the bed with fresh sheets, arranged my books on the empty shelves along one wall, and set up my laptop on the desk. The desk chair wasn't great. I'd probably need to get a better one from town sometime. But the view from the window was perfect. Nothing but trees and mountains. No distractions. I heated up some soup for dinner and ate it standing at the counter, looking around at my new home. The place needed some work, weather stripping around the windows, maybe a fresh coat of paint in the bathroom. But overall, it was solid, quiet, mine. After dinner, I built a fire in the wood stove. Turned out there was plenty of firewood stacked against the back of the cabin, neatly split and covered with a tarp. At least Gibson had been organized, even if he'd gone a bit crazy. I remembered the crumpled note and went to pick it up. Something made me smooth it out and read it again. The rules still sounded ridiculous, but I found myself wondering what had happened to make Gibson write them. What had scared him so much? "Get a grip, Daniel," I said out loud. The guy was losing it. I folded the note and stuck it in the drawer of the desk. No reason to keep it, really, but throwing it away suddenly felt wrong somehow, like tossing out someone's last words. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The silence helped. No street noise, no neighbors arguing through thin apartment walls. Just the occasional creak of the cabin settling and the soft whisper of wind in the pines. The next morning, I woke up early and made coffee, took it out to the front porch and sat on the steps watching the sun come up through the trees. The air was cold enough to see my breath. A layer of frost covered the ground, making everything sparkle. "This is going to work," I said to myself, and for the first time in a long time, I actually believed it. I spent that day setting up my writing space, positioned the desk so I could see out the window, but also turn away when the view got too distracting. Arranged my notes and research materials within easy reach, set up my backup drive and checked that the satellite internet was working. The connection was slow, but good enough for basic research and email. I wasn't here to surf the web anyway. That afternoon, I hiked around the property. The cabin sat on 5 acres, mostly wooded. A small stream ran along the eastern edge, barely more than a trickle this time of year, but the real estate agent had said it ran stronger in spring. I found a flat rock beside it and sat for a while, just listening to the water and the birds. On my way back, I noticed a faint trail leading deeper into the forest, away from my property, probably an animal path. I made a mental note to explore it another day, when I had more time. The next few days fell into an easy routine. Up at 7, coffee, breakfast, then writing until noon. Lunch, then more writing or chores around the cabin. In the evenings, I'd read or plan the next day's work. I kept my phone off most of the time. No one to call anyway. I'd told my few friends I was going off-grid for a while. Needed to focus. By the end of the week, I'd written more than I had in the previous month. The words came easier here. Something about the quiet, maybe, or knowing no one would interrupt me. Sunday night, I found myself thinking about Gibson's note. Rule number 3, salt on the porch. I actually laughed out loud as I was cooking dinner. The guy must have been really superstitious. Salt to keep away evil spirits or something. Old folklore nonsense. Still, I caught myself glancing at the clock as it approached 1 a.m. that night. I'd stayed up late reading, and when I noticed the time, 12:58, I remembered the first rule. Never leave between 1:12 and 1:26 a.m. Like I'd want to go outside at that hour anyway, I muttered, closing my book. I got ready for bed and was just about to turn out the light when I heard something outside, probably just a branch scraping against the roof, or an animal moving through the underbrush. But it made me pause. The digital clock on my nightstand read 1:11 a.m. I switched off the light and lay down, pulling the covers up. The cabin was silent, except for the occasional pop from the wood stove as it cooled down. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. A minute later, I heard it again. A shuffling sound, like footsteps in leaves. Then silence. I told myself it was nothing. Just the wind, or a deer, or my imagination working overtime after reading that stupid note. I rolled over and pulled the pillow around my ears. By morning, I'd forgotten all about it. The sun streamed through the bedroom window, and I got up feeling rested and ready to work. Another day in my new routine. The second week went much like the first. I settled in, wrote every day, and explored more of the surrounding forest when I needed breaks. Found an old logging road that made for good walking. Saw deer twice and what might have been a fox. I didn't think about Gibson's rules at all. They seemed even more ridiculous now that I'd been here a while. The cabin was just a cabin, a quiet place in the woods. Nothing strange about it. Nothing to be afraid of. I set up my writing desk exactly where I wanted it, right by the front window where I could see the porch and the clearing beyond. The morning light was perfect there. I arranged my notes and research materials within easy reach and hung a corkboard on the wall for my outline and character notes. The routine was exactly what I needed. Wake up, coffee, write, break for lunch, then more writing or chores around the cabin. In the evenings, I'd read or plan the next day's work. No distractions, no excuses, just me and the story. I explored the forest during daylight hours, never going far enough to lose sight of the cabin. Found some good spots for thinking: a fallen log by the stream, a rocky outcrop with a view of the valley. The solitude felt right, like I could finally hear myself think. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch in the evening, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The sky would turn orange, then deep purple, then black. Stars appeared by the thousands, more than I'd ever seen in the city. On clear nights, the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. This is exactly what I needed, I said to myself on the 10th night. And I meant it. The city felt like a distant memory. This was home now. I did notice one odd thing, though I tried not to make too much of it. Sometimes when I was outside, I got the feeling I was being watched. It would come over me suddenly, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, a tightness in my chest. I'd look around, see nothing, and the feeling would pass. Probably just hyper-awareness from being alone. Or maybe there were mountain lions in the area. I made a mental note to ask in town next time I went for supplies. By the end of the second week, I was fully settled in. The cabin felt comfortable, lived in. My novel was progressing well, better than it had in months. The isolation was working exactly as I'd hoped. I woke up to someone pounding on my front door, not just knocking. This was a full-on assault. The whole cabin seemed to shake with each hit. I bolted upright, heart hammering. My phone said 1:13 a.m. The knocking continued, steady and mechanical. 3 hard knocks, pause. 3 more, pause. Like someone was using the side of their fist. "Who's there?" I called out, but my voice came out smaller than I'd intended. No answer, just more knocking. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and fumbled for the lamp switch. The light clicked on, making me squint. I'd been at the cabin just over a week now, and I still wasn't used to how completely dark it got out here. No streetlights, no neighbors, nothing but stars when the sky was clear. The knocking didn't let up. If anything, it got louder. I pulled on sweatpants and grabbed my phone, using the flashlight to guide me down the short hallway. The wooden floor was cold against my bare feet. "I'm coming!" I shouted, irritated now. Who the hell would be out here at this hour? Maybe a hiker got lost? Or maybe Hunter, the neighbor who found Rowan Gibson's body, needed help with something. The knocking maintained its perfect rhythm. 3 hits, pause. 3 hits, pause. I reached the front door and put my hand on the knob. Then I stopped. Gibson's note, the one with the rules. What was the first one again? I stood frozen, my hand on the doorknob while the knocking continued. Rule number 1 was something about not going outside during certain hours. And rule number 2 was, don't answer knocking during those times. A chill ran through me as I remembered the exact wording. Never leave the cabin between 1:12 and 1:26 a.m. Don't answer knocking or look out windows during those times. I checked my phone again. 1:17 a.m. This was stupid. Someone was clearly at my door needing help, and I was standing here remembering some crazy note from a man who'd lost his mind. The knocking hit again. 3 perfect beats that seemed to vibrate through the floor and up into my chest. "Who is it?" I called out, louder this time. Nothing but more knocking. I stepped to the side of the door where a small peephole was installed. I hadn't even noticed it before. I leaned in and put my eye to it. Nothing but darkness. No shape, no figure, just black. I pulled back, confused. The porch light was on. I always left it on at night. I should have been able to see something. The knocking came again, so forceful that the door actually shifted in its frame. "Jesus," I muttered, stepping back. I thought about my options. I could open the door, but something about this felt very wrong. The perfect rhythm, the lack of response, the darkness in the peephole, it all added up to something I didn't want to face. But what if someone really needed help? I grabbed my phone and pulled up the flashlight app, then positioned myself to the side of the window near the door. I'd just take a quick peek through the curtains. My hand was on the edge of the fabric when I stopped again. Don't look out windows during those times. This was ridiculous. I was a grown man afraid to look out my own window because of some note. But still, I hesitated. The knocking continued, unrelenting. 3 perfect beats, pause. 3 perfect beats, pause. It had the precision of a metronome. I decided to try something else. I turned off all the lights and walked to the back of the cabin. There was a window in the bedroom that looked out toward the trees behind the property. From there, I might be able to see if there was a car or anything else that would explain who was at my door. I parted the curtains and looked out. The night was clear, stars visible above the tree line, no cars, no lights, nothing but darkness. The knocking at the front door hadn't stopped or even slowed down. I went back to the living room and stood a few feet from the door, watching it shudder slightly with each impact. "If you need help," I said loudly, "tell me who you are." Nothing but knocking. I checked my phone again. 1:24 a.m. If Gibson's note was right, whatever this was would stop in 2 minutes. I decided to wait it out. The 2 minutes felt like an hour. I stood there, watching the door, listening to the perfectly timed knocks that seemed to reverberate through my entire body. Then, at exactly 1:26 a.m., it stopped. The silence was so sudden it felt like a physical presence. One moment the cabin was filled with that rhythmic pounding, and the next, nothing. Not even the sound of footsteps walking away. I waited another 5 minutes before approaching the door. I put my ear against it. Nothing. I wasn't about to open it, not after that. Instead, I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, telling myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe it was an animal. A bear, maybe? Do bears knock on doors? Or maybe it was the wind somehow creating a weird pattern against the door. But I knew neither explanation made sense. The knocking had been too deliberate, too precise, and it had stopped exactly when Gibson's note said it would. By the time morning came, I was exhausted but too wired to sleep. I made coffee, a double batch, and waited for full daylight before opening the front door. The porch was empty. No footprints in the dirt, no marks on the door, nothing. It looked exactly as it had yesterday. I stepped outside, coffee mug in hand, and examined the ground carefully. The area in front of the door was hard-packed dirt, but it would still show some sign of someone standing there. There was nothing. I walked around the entire cabin. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign anyone had been here at all. Back inside, I opened the desk drawer and took out Gibson's note. I read through the rules again. 1. Never leave cabin between 1:12 or 1:26 a.m. 2. Don't answer knocking or look out windows during those times. 3. Leave salt pile on porch Sunday nights. 4. If seeing woman in white in forest, return immediately without speaking. 5. Stay inside with curtains drawn during storms. 6. Go inside immediately. If feeling watched outside, I folded the note and put it in my pocket. I wasn't sure I believed any of this, but after last night, I wasn't taking chances. That day, my writing didn't go well. I kept getting distracted, looking out the windows, checking the time. Every noise made me jump. By evening, I was convinced I'd imagined the whole thing, that it was just a vivid dream or my mind playing tricks after reading that note. But still, when Sunday night came around, I found myself in the kitchen looking for salt. I had a container of table salt in the pantry. It didn't seem like enough for a pile, so I poured it into a small ceramic bowl. I felt ridiculous as I opened the front door and set the bowl on the porch steps. "This is stupid," I muttered to myself as I went back inside. I tried to read for a while but couldn't focus. Eventually, I went to bed, half expecting the knocking to return. It didn't. I slept straight through until morning. When I woke up, my first thought was the salt. I got out of bed and went straight to the front door, still in my pajamas. The bowl was still there on the step where I'd left it, but the salt wasn't white anymore. It was black, completely black, like someone had replaced it with ashes or dirt. I crouched down and looked closer. It still had the granular texture of salt, but it was black as coal. I reached out to touch it, then pulled my hand back. "What the hell?" I whispered. I went inside and found a spoon, then came back and poked at the black substance. It moved like salt. I picked up the bowl carefully and sniffed it. No smell. This had to be a prank. Someone was messing with me. Maybe Hunter, the neighbor, but I hadn't seen or spoken to anyone in days. I carried the bowl around to the back of the cabin, my hands shaking slightly. When I reached the edge of the trees, I dumped the black salt onto the ground. It poured out in a smooth stream, just like regular salt would. I hurried back inside and washed my hands thoroughly, then washed the bowl 3 times for good measure. For the next few days, I stuck to the cabin and the immediate clearing around it. I didn't hike in the woods, didn't explore. I kept Gibson's note in my pocket at all times. No more knocking came at night. After a week without incident, I started to relax a little. I told myself there were logical explanations for everything. The knocking could have been an animal or the wind. The salt turning black might have been some chemical reaction with the night air, Or maybe there was something on the porch that contaminated it. I needed to get back to my routine. I came here to write, not to indulge in paranoia. 2 weeks after the knocking incident, I was running low on firewood. The pile stacked against the back of the cabin was dwindling, and with autumn deepening, the nights were getting colder. I found an axe in the small shed behind the cabin. The handle was worn smooth from use, and the blade was sharp. There was a chopping block already set up, a thick section of tree trunk positioned in a flat clearing about 20 feet from the back door. I spent the morning hauling logs from a fallen tree at the edge of my property. By noon, I had a good pile ready for splitting. It was satisfying work. Physical, repetitive, with tangible results. The kind of thing that clears your head. Lift the axe, swing down, watch the wood split apart. Stack the pieces, grab another log, repeat. I was so focused on the rhythm of it that I almost didn't notice her. A flash of white caught my eye as I was setting up another log. I looked up toward the tree line about 50 yards away. There was a woman standing there watching me. She wore what looked like a long white dress or maybe a nightgown. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders. I straightened up, axe in hand. "Hello?" I called. She didn't move or respond. I squinted, trying to see her more clearly. The sun was behind her, making it hard to make out her features. "Can I help you?" I called, louder this time. Still nothing. She just stood there, perfectly still, watching me. That's when I remembered rule number 4. If seeing woman in white in forest, return immediately without speaking. Too late for that. I'd already called out to her twice. A chill ran through me despite the sweat from chopping wood. Something about the way she stood there, so still, so silent, made my skin crawl. I set the axe down carefully against the chopping block, not taking my eyes off her. "I'm going inside now," I said, not sure why I was telling her this. I started backing toward the cabin, still watching her. She didn't move. When I reached the back door, I fumbled for the handle, found it, and pushed my way inside. I closed the door and locked it, then went straight to the window. She was gone. Not walking away, not moving toward the cabin, just gone. The spot where she'd been standing was empty, nothing but trees and shadows. I checked all the windows, looking out in every direction. No sign of her anywhere. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the real estate listing for the property. I scrolled through the photos until I found one that showed the previous owner, Rowan Gibson, standing on the front porch. He was a thin man with glasses and graying temples. The listing mentioned he was a widower. His wife had disappeared 3 years before his death. I opened a browser and searched for Gibson missing wife, along with the name of the nearest town. A news article came up from 3 years ago. The headline read, "Local woman missing, police suspect foul play." There was a photo of Mackenzie Gibson, age 45. Dark hair, slim build. She'd last been seen walking near the national forest that bordered their property. Search teams found no trace of her. I stared at her photo for a long time. The woman I'd seen at the edge of the woods looked like her. Not exactly. The woman I saw had been too far away to make out clearly, but the general shape, the hair, the white clothing, it was possible. I put the phone down and went back to the window. The tree line was empty. No movement, no white dress, nothing. My hands were still trembling. I woke up to something weird. The cabin was way too quiet. No birds, no wind, just dead silence. I rolled out of bed and went to the window. The entire world had turned white overnight. The snow was at least a foot deep everywhere I could see. It covered the ground, the roof of the shed, the wood pile, everything under a thick white blanket. Huge flakes still fell, swirling in the air. I hadn't expected the first big snowfall for another couple weeks. I'd planned to make a supply run to town before then. "Well, shit," I said to the empty room. I pulled on a sweatshirt and jeans and headed to the kitchen. The coffee maker gurgled as I checked my phone. No service. The satellite internet was down too. I was completely cut off. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee, watching the snow fall. It was coming down hard now, the wind picking up. The trees at the edge of the clearing swayed. I thought about Gibson's rule about storms. Stay inside with the curtains drawn. It seemed excessive, but after seeing the woman in white and the knocking incident, I wasn't taking chances. I went around the cabin, closing all the curtains tight. The living room felt smaller with all the windows covered. I made a quick check of my supplies, enough food for at least 3 weeks, plenty of firewood stacked inside, water from the well. I'd be fine. Around noon, the wind really kicked up. It howled around the corners of the cabin, finding every crack and whistling through them. I could hear branches snapping in the distance. The temperature dropped fast. I could feel the cold seeping in through the windows. I built up the fire in the wood stove and sat at my desk, trying to write. I couldn't focus. Every noise made me jump. The storm got worse as the day went on. By late afternoon, it was a full blizzard. The wind screamed outside, and snow pelted against the windows like someone throwing handfuls of sand. I remembered the rest of Gibson's rule. Stay inside with the curtains drawn during storms. I'd closed them, but I hadn't checked all the windows and doors. I got up and walked through the cabin, making sure everything was locked tight. The bathroom window had a loose latch. I fixed it, then checked the back door again, making sure the deadbolt was turned. Back in the living room, I tried to read, but kept losing my place. The storm was getting to me. Or maybe it was Gibson's rules. They seemed less crazy with each passing day. I heated a can of soup for dinner and ate it at the kitchen table, listening to the wind. The cabin creaked and groaned around me. Old wood shifting, that's all. I kept telling myself that. Night came early. By 7, it was pitch black outside. I couldn't see anything through the cracks in the curtains, just darkness and swirling snow. I kept the lights on in every room. The shadows in the corners seemed darker than usual. I tried watching a movie on my laptop, but I couldn't pay attention. The battery was getting low anyway, and with no internet, there wasn't much else to do. I decided to turn in early. Maybe I'd sleep through the worst of the storm. I got ready for bed, brushed my teeth, changed into sweats and a t-shirt. I was just about to turn off the lights when the power went out. 1 second I was standing in the bright bathroom, and the next, darkness, complete darkness. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. "Fuck," I whispered. I felt my way along the wall to the hallway. I knew I had candles somewhere, and my phone was on the nightstand. The cabin felt different in the dark, bigger, emptier. I bumped into the doorframe and swore again. Finally, I made it to the bedroom and found my phone. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness. I went to the kitchen and dug through drawers until I found matches and candles. I lit 3 of them, placing them around the living room. The flickering light cast huge shadows that danced on the walls. I checked the time. Just past 10. I wasn't tired anymore. I sat on the couch with a blanket, watching the candle flames dance. The wind continued to howl. Something scratched against the side of the cabin, probably a branch. I tried not to think about the woman in white or what might be out there in the storm. Midnight came and went. I must have dozed off because I woke suddenly, disoriented. The candles had burned low. The cabin was freezing. The wood stove had died down to embers. I got up to add more logs. That's when I heard it. A soft scratching sound at the window behind the curtains, like fingernails dragging slowly across the glass. I froze, the log still in my hand. The scratching continued, slow and deliberate. 3 long drags, pause, 3 more. It wasn't random like a branch would make. It was purposeful. I put the log in the stove quietly and closed the door. The scratching stopped. I stood completely still, listening. Nothing but the wind. Then it started again, at a different window, the one in the kitchen, the same pattern. 3 long scratches, pause, repeat. Whatever it was had moved around the cabin. I picked up the baseball bat I'd left by the front door. The scratching continued for another minute, then stopped. I waited, my heart pounding in my ears. The next scratching came from the bathroom window. It was circling the cabin, methodically moving from window to window. "Who's there?" I called out, immediately regretting it. My voice sounded small and scared in the empty cabin. No response. Just more scratching, now at my bedroom window. I followed the sound, moving through the dark cabin with my bat raised. The scratching was louder here, more insistent. I could almost feel the vibration in the glass. I stood in the middle of my bedroom, watching the curtains. The scratching continued. I wanted to look, to pull back the curtain and see what was making the noise. But Gibson's rule echoed in my head. Stay inside with curtains drawn during storms. The scratching moved to the front door now. I followed it back to the living room. It sounded like someone dragging their nails down the wooden door, slow and deliberate. Then it stopped. Complete silence. I waited, bat clutched in my sweaty hands. Nothing. Just when I thought it was over, the scratching started again, back at the first window. It was making another circuit around the cabin. I sat on the couch, bat across my knees, and waited. The scratching continued its path, window to window, door to window, around and around. Sometimes it would stop for 5 or 10 minutes, and I'd think it was over. Then it would start again, always in the next location in sequence, like whatever was out there knew exactly where to go next. Hours passed. I checked my phone. The battery was at 15%, but I could see it was almost 5 a.m. The scratching had continued all night, circling the cabin over and over. I was exhausted, but too terrified to sleep. The scratching was at the kitchen window again when I noticed something. The darkness outside wasn't quite as complete. Dawn was coming. As the light grew, the scratching became less frequent, the pauses longer. By the time I could see gray daylight through the cracks in the curtains, the scratching had stopped completely. I waited another 30 minutes before I worked up the courage to look outside. I pulled back the curtain just an inch and peeked out. The storm had passed. The world was transformed. Smooth white snow covered everything. No tracks, no sign of anyone or anything that might have been circling my cabin all night. Just pristine, untouched snow as far as I could see. I opened the curtains in every room. Bright morning sunlight reflected off the snow, almost blinding. I unlocked the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The cold air hit me like a slap. The snow was deep, at least 18 inches. It would be days before I could get out. I walked around the entire cabin, looking for tracks, marks on the windows, any evidence of what had been scratching all night. Nothing. The snow around the cabin was perfectly smooth, like nothing had been there at all. I went back inside and added wood to the stove. As it warmed up, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was just branches scraping the cabin. Maybe the wind had carried debris that hit the windows in a pattern that only seemed deliberate. But I knew better. Whatever had circled my cabin all night hadn't left tracks because it didn't need to. The days after the storm passed quietly. The power came back on. The satellite internet reconnected, and life returned to something like normal. But I felt different, more cautious. I kept all the curtains open during the day, letting in as much light as possible. At night, I closed and locked everything, drawing the curtains tight. November got colder. The snow from the big storm partially melted, then froze again, creating an icy crust over everything. I resumed my writing routine, but I didn't venture as far from the cabin. Something about being outside made me uneasy. It was subtle at first, a feeling of being watched when I went to get firewood or clear snow from the porch. I'd turn quickly, trying to catch whatever was looking at me, but there was never anything there, just the trees and the snow and the endless sky. The feeling got worse. About a week after the storm, I was chopping wood near the shed when the hairs on my neck stood up. I turned, axe in hand, and saw something dart between trees at the edge of the clearing. Just a quick movement, there and gone. "Hello?" I called. No answer. I put down the axe and walked toward the tree line, stopping about halfway. I scanned the forest but saw nothing unusual. Still, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get a full breath. I remembered Gibson's rule: go inside immediately if feeling watched outside. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes on the trees, then turned and walked quickly to the cabin. Once inside, with the door locked, the feeling eased. This happened again the next day and the day after. Each time I went outside, I'd feel watched within minutes. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of movement just at the edge of my vision, shadows slipping between trees, gone when I turned to look directly. I started limiting my time outdoors to the absolute minimum. Quick trips for firewood, that's it. No more hikes, no exploring. I told myself it was because of the cold, but I knew better. One night, the knocking returned. 3 hard knocks on the front door at exactly 1:12 a.m. I was ready this time. I'd set an alarm for 1:05 and was already sitting in my bedroom with the door locked, lights off. I didn't call out, didn't move, just sat and listened as the knocking continued, mechanical and persistent, until 1:26 when it stopped abruptly. The knocking came again 2 nights later, and again 3 nights after that. Always the same time window, always the same pattern. I started setting my alarm every night just in case. I woke one morning to fresh snow, just a couple inches, not another big storm. I made coffee and took it to the living room window, looking out at the pristine white covering. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Small, bare footprints in the snow, leading directly to my front door. I set down my coffee so fast it sloshed over the rim. I pulled on boots and a coat, not bothering with gloves, and went outside. The footprints were unmistakable, the clear impression of bare feet, about a size 7 or 8, women's. They came straight to my door from the direction of the forest. I followed them backward, staying beside the tracks rather than stepping in them. They led in a straight line toward the trees. I followed them all the way to the tree line where they just stopped, or started, depending on which direction you were going. The last footprint was perfectly formed, and beyond it, untouched snow. I looked up at the trees, half expecting to see the woman in white watching me. Nothing, just bare branches and silence. Back at the cabin, I examined the door. No marks, no sign that anyone had tried to get in. I went inside and checked all the locks. Everything was secure. That night, the knocking was different. It started at 1:12 as usual, but it wasn't just at the front door. It seemed to come from all around the cabin, multiple fists pounding on doors, walls, windows, all at once. The entire cabin seemed to vibrate with it. I sat in my locked bedroom, back against the headboard, baseball bat clutched in my hands. The knocking was so loud I put my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. It felt like it was inside my head. At exactly 1:26, it stopped. The silence was almost as bad as the noise had been. The next morning, I placed salt on the porch as Gibson's rules instructed. I didn't wait for Sunday. I needed whatever protection it might offer. The day passed quietly. I tried to write but kept looking out the window, checking for footprints, for movement at the tree line. The salt had turned black by evening. I disposed of it behind the shed and put out a fresh bowl. I was running low on salt. I'd have to figure out an alternative if this kept up. The knocking returned that night, and the next. Always multiple sources now, always from 1:12 to 1:26 exactly. I'd sit in my room, counting the seconds until it ended, wondering what would happen if whatever was out there ever got in. One morning, I found more footprints, the same small bare feet. This time, they circled the entire cabin before leading to the front door. Again, they began or ended at the tree line with no tracks beyond. I started keeping a log, like Gibson must have done. Dates, times, observations, the knocking, the scratching, the footprints, the feeling of being watched, the shadows moving between trees. Writing it all down made it seem more real but also more manageable somehow. The pattern was clear. Whatever was out there was getting more persistent, more aggressive. The knocking was louder, the footprints came more often, and the feeling of being watched was almost constant now, even when I was inside. I set alarms on my phone for 1:05 a.m. every night. I'd go to my bedroom, lock the door, and sit with my back against the headboard, bat across my knees. When the knocking started, I'd close my eyes and count the seconds, waiting for 1:26 to arrive. Sometimes it seemed like the knocking was right on my bedroom door, like whatever was out there had somehow gotten inside the cabin. I'd open my eyes and stare at the door, watching the knob, terrified it would start to turn. It never did. But each night, the knocking got louder, more insistent, multiple fists pounding in perfect unison, like an army surrounding the cabin. And each morning, I'd find new footprints in the snow. Always the same small bare feet, always starting or ending at the tree line with no tracks beyond. I was running out of salt, running out of patience, running out of explanations that made any sense. Tonight was the worst yet. The knocking started at 1:12 on the dot, but it wasn't just knocking anymore. There were scratches too, and what sounded like bodies throwing themselves against the walls. The whole cabin shook. I sat in my bedroom, counting the seconds, the bat useless in my trembling hands. "One more minute," I whispered at 1:25. "Just one more minute." The assault on the cabin reached a crescendo. It sounded like dozens of fists pounding everywhere at once, like the cabin might collapse under the force of it. Then, at exactly 1:26, it stopped. Complete silence. I waited, counting to 100 in my head. Nothing. It was over for another night. I didn't sleep. I sat there until dawn, watching the door, listening for any sound. When the first gray light appeared around the edges of my curtains, I finally set down the bat. I'd make coffee, check for footprints, put out more salt, and I'd keep following Gibson's rules. They were the only thing keeping whatever was out there from getting in. The roads weren't great after the snow, but I needed supplies and answers. My pickup handled the slush okay, though I had to grip the wheel tight on some of the curves heading down the mountain. The isolation that had seemed perfect for riding now felt different, like I'd trapped myself. Pine Ridge wasn't much of a town. One main street with businesses on both sides, grocery store, hardware place, a diner, and the library. A few side streets with houses. I parked in front of Miners Market, a small grocery with wooden siding that had seen better days. Inside, I grabbed a cart and started filling it with essentials. Canned stuff, pasta, coffee, more salt, lots more salt. The older woman at the register raised her eyebrows at the 4 containers. "Making pretzels?" she asked. "Something like that." I paid and loaded the bags into my truck. The library was just down the street, an old brick building with Pine Ridge Public Library carved above the door. Bells jingled when I walked in. The place smelled like old books and lemon cleaner. Tall shelves lined the walls, and a few tables sat in the center with a couple of desktop computers. A woman with silver hair pulled back in a bun looked up from the desk. She had reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck and wore a blue cardigan. "Hello there," she said. "Can I help you find something?" I approached the desk. "I hope so. I'm staying at a cabin outside town, used to belong to Rowan Gibson." Her expression changed immediately. "Oh, I see." She studied me more carefully now. "I'm Julie Jacobs, the librarian. You must be the new owner." "Daniel Porter," I said. "I'm a writer. Bought it for some peace and quiet." She nodded slowly. "And how's that working out for you?" The question felt loaded. I wasn't about to tell a stranger about knocking sounds and women in white. "It's isolated, just what I needed." I paused. "I found a note from Gibson with some unusual instructions." Julie looked around the empty library, then back at me. "I'm not surprised. Rowan changed a lot toward the end." "That's what I'm trying to understand. Do you have any information about him? Newspaper articles, anything like that? We keep local papers on microfiche, and I've lived here 40 years, so I know most everyone." She stood up. "Follow me." Julie led me to a small room in the back with a microfiche reader and file cabinets. "Rowan moved here about 5 years ago with his wife, Mackenzie," she said, opening a drawer and flipping through folders. "He was quite successful. An architect from Denver, designed some big buildings downtown, I heard. So they weren't locals?" "No, city folk looking for mountain living." She pulled out a folder. "Like you, I suppose." She laid some papers on the table. One was a real estate listing from 5 years back, showing Gibson's purchase of the cabin. Another was a small newspaper clipping about a new resident donating design services for the town's library renovation. "He was friendly at first," Julie said. "He and Mackenzie would come to town events. He joined the Historical Society. She volunteered at the elementary school sometimes." "What changed?" Julie's mouth tightened. "Mackenzie disappeared 3 years ago. Walking in the forest, they said. Search parties found nothing." She handed me a newspaper with the headline, "Local Woman Missing Police Suspect Foul Play." The same article I'd found online. "After that, Rowan was different," Julie continued. "Started coming to town less and less. When he did show up for supplies, he looked terrible. Lost weight. Jumpy. Wouldn't talk to anyone unless he had to." "Did people think he had something to do with her disappearance?" Julie shrugged. "Some did. Sheriff investigated him thoroughly. Found nothing suspicious. Most folks figured she got lost in the woods. It happens up here. The forest can be unforgiving." I thought about the woman in white at the edge of the trees, the knocking at night. "How did Gibson die?" I asked. "Heart attack officially." Julie pulled out another clipping. "Hunter Price found him. Hunter has the cabin about a mile from yours. Checks on the more isolated residents during winter." The article was brief. "Local man found deceased." It mentioned Gibson was discovered in his home after missing his weekly supply run to town. "Hunter said Rowan had salt all over the place," Julie added, lowering her voice. "Piles of it by every door and window. Strange markings on the walls. Pages of notes about things he thought he saw." My stomach tightened. "What kind of things?" Julie looked uncomfortable. "Hunter didn't share details. Said it was the ramblings of a man who'd been alone too long. Grief does things to people." Has anyone else who lived there reported unusual occurrences? She studied me. Like what, exactly? I wasn't ready to lay out everything I'd experienced. Just curious if there are local legends, ghost stories about that area. Julie hesitated. That whole section of forest has stories, old mining accidents, hikers who vanished. Most mountain areas do. She wasn't telling me everything. I could see it in the way she avoided my eyes. Julie, I said quietly, I need to know what I'm dealing with. She sighed and sat down at the table. There have always been stories about the woman in white, long before Gibson moved here. My breath caught. What woman? Some say she's a lost hiker who died in a blizzard. Others think she's something older. Julie's voice dropped further. People who've seen her describe the same thing. Dark hair, white dress, watching from the trees. The old-timers say if she appears to you, it means the forest wants something. Wants what? That's the part no one agrees on. Julie straightened some papers. Most locals avoid that section of forest after dark. Always have. And Gibson? What did he say about her? He came in here about 6 months before he died, looking wild-eyed, asked for books on protective symbols, salt circles, warding off spirits. We don't have much on that sort of thing, but I found him what I could. She paused. He told me he'd seen her, that she was coming closer to the cabin every night. I felt cold despite the library's heating. Did he say anything else? Julie shook her head. That was the last time I saw him alive. She looked at me directly. Have you seen her, Mr. Porter? I considered lying, but something in her expression told me she already knew the answer. Yes, I admitted. At the edge of the trees. Julie nodded like I'd confirmed something. Then you should know Gibson wasn't crazy. Whatever's happening at that cabin, it's happened before. Do you know what it is? How to stop it? If I did, don't you think I would have told Rowan? She looked sad. All I know is what the old stories say. Don't speak to her. Don't invite her in. Gibson left rules, I said, about not going out at certain times, putting out salt. Then I'd follow them. Julie stood up. And maybe consider not staying there alone. I gathered the articles, thanking her. As I turned to leave, she caught my arm. One more thing, she said quietly. Hunter told me that when he found Gibson's body, all the doors and windows were locked from the inside. But there were wet footprints across the floor that weren't Gibson's. Smaller, like a woman's. I drove back to the cabin with Julie's words echoing in my head. The forest looked different now, less scenic, more watchful. I checked my watch. 4:30. The sun would set in about an hour. I needed to get inside before dark. After unloading the groceries, I made coffee and spread the articles on the kitchen table. Nothing told me how to deal with what was happening, but at least I knew Gibson hadn't imagined it. Whatever haunted this place had driven him to desperate measures before his heart gave out. I worked at my laptop until sunset, then closed all the curtains and double-checked the locks. The routine was automatic now. Salt, locks, lights. I'd set my alarm for 1:05 a.m. as usual. Around 8, I sat at my desk to get some writing done. The words weren't flowing, but I forced myself to focus. The cabin creaked occasionally with the wind, normal sounds I'd gotten used to. Then, I heard something different. A soft scraping against the window beside my desk. I froze, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The curtain was drawn, but there was a small gap where it didn't quite meet the wall. A sliver of darkness showed through. The scraping came again. Deliberate. Not a branch or animal. More like fingernails. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. Then, slowly, a pale hand appeared in the gap between curtain and wall. White fingers curled around the edge of the fabric. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. I couldn't move, couldn't look away as the fingers slowly pulled the curtain aside. A face pressed against the glass. Her face. It was the woman in white, but closer than I'd ever seen her. Her skin was so pale it was almost translucent, bluish veins visible beneath. Dark, wet-looking hair framed her face. But it was her eyes that paralyzed me. Black, empty, fixed on mine with terrible awareness. She didn't blink, didn't move, just stared through the glass with those bottomless eyes. Then she raised her hand and placed it flat against the window, palm pressing into the glass. Her breath fogged the pain around her mouth, proving she was somehow breathing. My desk lamp flickered. In that microsecond of darkness, her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. When the light steadied, she was still there, hand against the glass, eyes locked on mine. She held that position for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then she backed away from the window, her hand sliding off the glass last. I caught a glimpse of her white dress as she turned and walked toward the forest, her movements unnaturally smooth. I sat there, unable to move, for several minutes. When I finally stood, my legs nearly buckled. I stumbled to the bathroom and threw up. After washing my face with shaking hands, I grabbed my phone and the baseball bat. I retreated to the bedroom, locking the door behind me. I pushed the dresser against it for good measure. I checked every window lock in the room, drew the curtains tight, sat on the bed with my back against the headboard, bat across my lap. I didn't sleep. Every sound, the wind, the house settling, branches against the roof, made me flinch. I checked my phone obsessively. When 1:12 hit, the knocking started as usual. Tonight it seemed quieter, almost perfunctory. It stopped at 1:26 exactly. Dawn came after the longest night of my life. I waited until full daylight before moving the dresser and unlocking the bedroom door. The cabin was silent and still. Everything looked normal. I made coffee with trembling hands, then forced myself to approach the window by my desk. The curtain was still partially pulled aside where she'd moved it. There, on the outside of the glass, was a perfect handprint. It wasn't visible as a smudge or dirt mark. Instead, the window around the handprint was fogged with condensation, but the handprint itself was clear, as if the glass there was much colder than the surrounding pane. I touched the glass. The handprint area was ice cold, while the rest of the window was room temperature. I ran my finger along the outline of her palm, her slender fingers. The cold burned my skin. I got a rag and window cleaner and sprayed the glass, wiping firmly. The condensation cleared, but the handprint remained, a perfect clear outline in the fog that immediately reformed. I tried again, scrubbing harder. The handprint stayed. I even got a hairdryer and blasted the spot with hot air. The glass warmed briefly, but as soon as I stopped, the cold handprint reappeared, moisture condensing around it. I stared at the perfect impression of her hand on my window. She had been real, not a hallucination, not a dream. And she'd found a way to leave her mark. I sat at the kitchen table staring at that handprint on my window. Hadn't moved in an hour. Just sat there with my cold coffee, watching how the morning light hit the glass in a way that made her mark even more visible. The coffee wasn't doing much for me anyway. Hadn't slept more than a couple hours. The handprint wasn't going anywhere. I'd tried everything. Window cleaner, alcohol, even a razor blade. Nothing touched it. The glass around it would get warm, but that perfect outline stayed ice cold, like she'd pressed her hand through from somewhere else entirely. I got up and made fresh coffee. Had to do something with my hands. While the pot brewed, I pulled Gibson's rules from my pocket and smoothed them out on the counter, read them for probably the 100th time. 1. Never leave the cabin between 1:12 and 1:26 a.m. 2. Don't answer knocking or look out windows during those times. 3. Leave a pile of salt on the porch every Sunday night. 4. If you see a woman in white in the forest, return to the cabin immediately without speaking to her. 5. Stay inside with curtains drawn during storms. 6. If you feel watched while outside, go inside immediately. I'd broken Rule 4 already. Spoke to her before I knew better. And last night, I'd broken Rule 2, or at least part of it. Didn't answer the knocking, but I'd seen her through that window. Now her handprint was there permanently, like she'd marked me somehow. The coffee maker finished with a gurgle. I poured a cup and went back to the table, sitting where I couldn't see the handprint. Didn't help much. Could still feel it there, like it was watching me. My phone buzzed. Text from my agent. How's the progress? Publisher asking for update on manuscript. I typed back, moving along. Need more time. Then turned my phone off. Truth was, I hadn't written anything worth keeping in days. How could I focus with all this happening? The knocking, the footprints, and now her, Mackenzie Gibson, standing at my window last night. I finished my coffee and made a decision. Gibson's rules weren't suggestions anymore. They were survival instructions. From now on, I'd follow every single one to the letter. Winter settled in hard over the next few weeks. Snow piled up outside, 3 feet deep in some spots. The temperature stayed below freezing most days. I kept the fire going constantly, burning through my wood supply faster than I'd planned. Every Sunday night, I put the salt bowl out. Every Monday morning, I'd find it turned black. Started using more salt each time, figuring more protection couldn't hurt. Bought 20 containers on my last supply run to Pine Ridge. The cashier stopped asking about pretzels. The knocking continued every few nights, always from 1:12 to 1:26 exactly. I'd started setting 2 alarms, one for 1:05 so I could get to the bedroom, and another for 1:27 to know when it was safe. Started sleeping with the baseball bat next to my bed too. I never looked out during those 14 minutes. Not once. Not even when the knocking became pounding, or when I heard what sounded like fingernails dragging across all the windows simultaneously. Some nights I'd put pillows over my head to block the sounds, but I could still feel the vibrations through the walls. The handprint stayed on my window. I'd given up trying to remove it and rearranged my desk so I wouldn't have to look at it while working. Still felt it there though, like a cold spot in the room. I never stayed outside when I felt watched. The moment that prickly feeling hit the back of my neck, I'd drop whatever I was doing and go inside. Lost a whole armload of firewood once when I felt it. Just dropped everything and ran. Found the wood scattered across the snow next morning, partially buried in a fresh snowfall. No footprints around it except mine. December 24th arrived. Christmas Eve. Not that it mattered much out here. I hadn't put up decorations or anything. No point when there's nobody to see them. My family thought I was staying at a writer's retreat in Vermont. That's what I'd told them before coming out here. Easier than explaining I'd bought a cabin in the middle of nowhere. The snow had stopped for once, and the sky cleared enough to see stars. I sat on the couch with a glass of whiskey, Gibson's note on the coffee table in front of me. It was getting worn from constant handling, the creases turning to tears along the fold lines. I'd have to be more careful with it. I picked it up again, holding it gently. The typed rules were clear enough, but something caught my eye this time. A faint mark in the margin I hadn't noticed before. I tilted the paper toward the lamp. There was writing there, faint pencil marks, barely visible. I squinted, trying to make it out. The handwriting was shaky, different from the signature at the bottom. They took my wife first. Don't let them take you too. I felt cold all over. Read it again and again. They took my wife first. They, not she. They. I set the paper down carefully and went to my laptop. The internet connection was working tonight, thankfully. I opened a browser and searched for Mackenzie Gibson missing Pine Ridge again. The same article came up that I'd found before. I read it more carefully this time. Mackenzie Gibson, 45, had disappeared while hiking near their property. The article mentioned search parties finding no trace of her. Her husband, Rowan, reported her missing after she failed to return from an afternoon walk. No signs of animal attack, no evidence of foul play, just gone. I kept searching, digging deeper into news archives. Found a follow-up article from a month later. The search had been called off. Authorities suspected she might have fallen into one of the abandoned mining shafts in the area, though none had been found disturbed. Another article, dated 6 months after her disappearance, mentioned Rowan Gibson offering a $10,000 reward for any information. His quote, "Someone must have seen something. People don't just vanish." I clicked through to the next page of search results and found a small piece from the Pine Ridge Gazette, published about a year after Mackenzie disappeared. It was about Rowan Gibson becoming increasingly reclusive. Neighbors expressed concern about his mental health. He'd reportedly started telling people his wife was still out there and that they wouldn't let her rest. There it was again. I switched to searching for information about Rowan himself. Found his obituary. Heart attack at age 48. Survived by no one. The article mentioned he'd been a successful architect who designed several notable buildings in Denver before moving to Pine Ridge for a simpler life with his wife Mackenzie. There was a picture of them together from some charity event. They looked happy, normal. She had dark hair and a slim build, just like the woman I'd seen. But in the photo, her eyes were normal. Brown, warm-looking. Nothing like the black voids I'd seen pressed against my window. I kept searching until I found an article about his death. Hunter Price had discovered the body after Rowan missed their weekly check-in. The article mentioned the cabin had been unusually secured with salt at all entry points. The police report noted no signs of forced entry or struggle. I closed my laptop and went back to the note on the coffee table. They took my wife first. Don't let them take you too. What did he mean by they? Who was they? And if the woman in white was Mackenzie, Who or what had taken her? What had she become? I took a long drink of whiskey and stared at the fire. The woman I'd seen wasn't just some ghost or hallucination. She was real enough to leave a handprint that wouldn't go away. Real enough to open my curtain with physical fingers. And if Gibson's note was right, she wasn't alone. January and February were brutal. Storm after storm dumped more snow. The temperature dropped to 15 below zero some nights. I had to dig pathways through snow just to reach the woodpile. I followed the rules religiously. Salt every Sunday. Inside by dark. No looking out during knocking times. The incidents increased, almost nightly now. Sometimes the whole cabin would shake, like something massive was throwing itself against the walls. The sounds changed too, not just knocking and scratching, but low moans that made my skin crawl. I'd taken to sleeping in the living room near the fire. The bedroom felt too exposed, too many windows. I kept Gibson's note with me at all times, folded in my shirt pocket during the day, under my pillow at night. The handprint remained. One morning in early March, I noticed something new. Tiny ice crystals forming around its edges, spreading outward like frost, but in perfectly straight lines. By afternoon, they'd disappear, only to return the next morning. I tried to write, to focus on my novel, but managed only a few pages most days. My agent had stopped texting after I missed my second deadline. The publisher would probably drop me soon. Didn't seem important anymore. I'd started keeping a journal of the incidents. Date, time, what I heard or saw, looking for patterns. The only consistent thing was the 112 to 126 window. Everything else seemed random. Which windows they'd scratch at, how many would knock at once, how violent the pounding would get. March brought slightly warmer weather. Snow began to melt, revealing patches of ground I hadn't seen in months. I ventured outside more, always watching the tree line, always ready to run back inside at the first feeling of being watched. One afternoon, while chopping wood, I heard a vehicle approaching. I set down the axe and walked around to the front of the cabin. A green pickup truck pulled into my clearing and parked. A man got out. Tall, weathered face, gray beard, flannel jacket. "You must be the new owner," he called, walking toward me with his hand extended. "Hunter Price. I've got the cabin about a mile east." I shook his hand. "Daniel Porter. Figured I should check in. Haven't seen smoke from your chimney for a couple days. Thought maybe you'd left." "Just rationing firewood," I said, running lower than I expected. Hunter nodded. "Got plenty at my place if you need some. Happy to share." "Thanks. Appreciate it." He glanced at the cabin, then back at me. "How you finding the place? Rowan keep it in good shape?" I hesitated, unsure how much to say. "Structure's solid. Had some interesting experiences, though." Hunter's expression changed slightly. "What kind of experiences?" "Noises at night, knocking, scratching." I paused. "You found him, right? Rowan Gibson." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, wasn't pretty. Found him in the living room, curled up by the fireplace. Doors locked from inside, windows too." He studied my face. "You've seen her, haven't you? The woman in white." My stomach dropped. "You know about her?" "Everyone around here knows the stories. Most don't believe them." He looked toward the trees. "Rowan did. Told me all kinds of things those last few months. Said she'd started bringing others with her." "Others?" "That's what he claimed. Said they'd stand at the edge of the trees watching. Said they wanted in." I swallowed hard. "Did you ever see anything when you'd visit him?" Hunter shook his head. "Never saw her myself, but I believed him. Man wasn't crazy. Scared, yeah, but not crazy." He turned back to me. "You following his rules?" "Every one of them." "Good. Keep doing that." He started walking back to his truck. "I'm heading into town tomorrow. Need anything?" "More salt," I said. "And coffee, if you don't mind." "No problem." He opened his truck door, then paused. "You know, my place has a spare room. If you ever need a break from this." I nodded. "Thanks. I'll keep that in mind." After Hunter left, I went back inside and locked the door. The offer was tempting, spending a night somewhere else, somewhere without the knocking and scratching. But something told me it wouldn't matter. They'd find me wherever I went now. April brought rain instead of snow, The ground turned to mud, making it hard to get in or out by vehicle. The forest came alive again, birds singing, new buds on the trees. Almost felt normal during daylight hours. Nights were still the same though. The knocking continued, sometimes so violent I was sure the door would splinter. The scratching too, and now a new sound, what seemed like whispers right outside the walls. Too quiet to make out words, but definitely voices. I kept following the rules. The salt turned black faster now, sometimes within hours of putting it out. I'd taken to spreading lines of it across all thresholds inside the cabin too. The handprint on my window had changed. The ice crystal lines extending from it had grown, forming what looked like a pattern across the glass. Geometric shapes that reminded me of snowflakes, but too perfect, too deliberate. One morning in late April, I woke to silence. No rain, no wind, no birds. I got up from the couch and looked out the front window. The clearing was empty, but something felt different. The trees at the edge seemed further away somehow, like the clearing had expanded overnight. I got dressed and went outside cautiously. The ground was firm under my feet, no longer muddy. I walked to where I remembered the tree line being and found fresh dirt, like the earth had been recently turned. The trees beyond looked thinned out, more space between them. As I stood there, I felt that familiar prickling sensation on the back of my neck, being watched. I turned and hurried back to the cabin, locking the door behind me. That night, for the first time in months, there was no knocking, no scratching, no whispers, just silence. It was worse somehow. I sat on the couch with Gibson's note in my hand, reading that penciled margin note over and over. I loaded the last box into my pickup and slammed the tailgate shut. That was it. Everything I'd brought to this place 6 months ago was back in the truck. I'd made it through winter. The morning sun felt good on my face. Spring had finally taken hold in the mountains, with patches of wildflowers pushing up through the melting snow. Birds were singing somewhere in the distance. Almost made you forget what happened here. Almost. I walked back to the cabin's front steps and picked up the folded piece of paper I'd left on the porch. It was my own version of the rules, typed up last night on my laptop and printed this morning. I'd spent hours getting the wording right. Not that it mattered how it sounded. What mattered was that whoever came next would believe it. The original note from Gibson was still in my pocket, worn thin at the creases from constant handling. I pulled it out and unfolded it one last time, reading through the 6 rules I now knew by heart. 1. Never leave cabin between 1:12 and 1:26 a.m. 2. Don't answer knocking or look out windows during those times. 3. Leave pile of salt on porch every Sunday night. 4. If you see woman in white in forest, return to cabin immediately without speaking to her. 5. Stay inside with curtains drawn during storms. 6. If you feel watched while outside, go inside immediately. And then that penciled note in the margin. They took my wife first. Don't let them take you too. I folded it back up and tucked it into my wallet. Didn't know why I was keeping it. Souvenir, I guess. Reminder of what I'd survived. My own version had 7 rules instead of 6. I'd added what I'd learned the hard way. Never look directly at her through any window. That handprint on my office window was still there, still ice cold to the touch even on warm days. I walked around to the side of the cabin where the foundation stones created a small gap. There was one loose rock about knee height that stuck out a bit from the others. I'd found Gibson's note tucked behind it when I first arrived. Seemed like the right place for mine. I knelt down and worked the stone free. The space behind it was just big enough for a folded piece of paper. I slipped my note inside and pushed the rock back into place, making sure it looked natural. Hope you find it, I said to whoever would come next. Hope you believe it. I stood up, brushing dirt from my jeans. The morning was warming up, but I still felt cold. Hadn't really felt warm since December, no matter how high I'd cranked the heat or how big I'd built the fire. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Text from Hunter. You heading out today? I typed back. Loading up now. Thanks again for everything. Hunter had been the only thing that kept me sane these past months. Weekly check-ins, extra firewood when I'd started running low, even brought me groceries during that big February storm when the road was impassable. Never once made me feel crazy when I told him what was happening. I looked at the cabin. Didn't look like much from the outside. Log walls, metal roof, stone chimney, windows with their curtains pulled back to let in the spring light. Hard to believe what happened inside those walls. The knocking had gotten worse as winter deepened. Not just at the front door anymore, but all around the cabin, like multiple fists pounding from every direction at once. Some nights it sounded like something massive throwing itself against the walls. The whole place would shake, and the scratching. God, the scratching. Like fingernails dragging across every window simultaneously. I'd started sleeping with my headphones in, music blasting, just to drown it out. Didn't help much. I walked back to the front door. Should probably take one last walk through, make sure I hadn't forgotten anything. Wasn't much left. I'd sold the furniture with the place. New owner was getting a good deal. Not that they'd appreciate it once things started happening. The front door creaked as I pushed it open. The cabin felt different, empty, bigger somehow, and the footsteps echoed on the wooden floor. The main room looked bare without the couch and coffee table, just dust outlines showing where they'd been. Kitchen area to the right, just counters and cabinets now. I'd cleaned out the fridge and pantry yesterday. I walked over to the desk by the window. My desk, the one thing I wasn't leaving behind. It was already loaded in the truck. The window above where it had sat still had that handprint. Clear as day, a perfect outline of a small woman's hand pressed against the glass. The area inside the print was always ice cold, no matter how warm the day. I'd tried everything to remove it. Window cleaner, alcohol, even a razor blade. Nothing worked. That was the night everything changed. When I realized this wasn't just some local ghost story or the paranoid delusions of the previous owner. When I saw her face pressed against the glass, those completely black eyes staring in at me. I walked down the hallway to the bedroom. Empty now, except for the bed frame. I'd stripped the mattress and box spring, loaded them into the truck first thing this morning. This room had been my sanctuary those long winter nights, where I'd wait out the knocking with my baseball bat across my knees, counting seconds until 1:26 a.m. when it would stop. The bathroom was last. I checked the medicine cabinet, empty. Looked under the sink, nothing. I'd been thorough. Back in the main room, I did one final sweep. Nothing left but dust and memories, and that handprint on the window. I stepped outside and locked the door behind me. The key would go to the real estate agent in town. I wasn't handling the sale this time. Couldn't bring myself to meet the new owners. Couldn't look someone in the eye and not warn them. Easier this way. The morning was bright and clear. From the front porch, you could see all the way down the slope to where the forest thickened in the valley. Beautiful view. Deadly quiet. I remembered that first day, how excited I'd been. 6 months of solitude to finish my book. Turned out I'd written less here than I had in years. Hard to focus on fiction when the real horror was happening around you every night. My agent had given up on me after the second missed deadline. Can't say I blamed her. The manuscript I'd managed to piece together was garbage anyway. Fragmented scenes and disjointed dialogue written during daylight hours when I wasn't jumping at every sound. I took a deep breath and looked around one last time. The clearing around the cabin, the woodpile out back that had saved my life during those bitter cold nights. The tree line where I'd first seen her standing, watching me. Time to go. I walked to my truck and climbed in. The engine started on the first try. Small mercies. I put it in reverse and backed up, turning to face down the long dirt driveway that would take me back to the main road. As I shifted into drive, something made me look in the rearview mirror. Force of habit, I guess. Check your mirrors before pulling away. And there she was, standing on the porch of the cabin, white dress hanging limp around her thin frame, dark hair wet and plastered to her skull, face pale as death. I froze, hand on the gear shift, foot hovering over the gas pedal. She wasn't supposed to come out in daylight. That had been the one constant. Whatever happened, happened at night. The days were safe. That's how I'd survived this long. But there she was, standing in the full morning sun, watching me. Her head tilted slightly like she was curious. Then her mouth opened, wider than a human mouth should be able to open. I couldn't hear anything, but I could see she was screaming. I slammed my foot on the gas. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning in the soft spring mud before finding purchase. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, knuckles white on the steering wheel. Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back. The dirt driveway seemed longer than I remembered, every curve revealing just more road instead of the main highway I was desperate to reach. I pushed the speedometer to 40, then 50, the truck bouncing hard over ruts and potholes. Finally, I saw it. the junction where my driveway met the paved road. I didn't even stop, just slowed enough to make the turn without rolling the truck. Then I hit the gas again, pushing 60, 70, the trees a green blur on either side. I didn't slow down until I hit the outskirts of Pine Ridge, forced myself to ease off the gas, breathe normally, stop glancing in the rear view every 5 seconds. She wasn't following me, couldn't follow me. That wasn't how it worked. I pulled into the lot outside the real estate office and sat there, engine idling, trying to get my heart rate under control. After a few minutes, I shut off the truck and grabbed the envelope from the passenger seat. Inside was the cabin key and a letter explaining I'd decided to sell. The bell over the door jingled as I walked in. Same agent who'd sold me the place greeted me with a smile that faded when she saw my face. "Mr. Porter, is everything all right?" "Fine," I said, handing her the envelope. "Just time to move on." She took it, confusion clear on her face. "But you've only been there 6 months. I thought you loved it." "Things change." I turned to leave, then stopped. "The new owners, they have kids?" She shook her head. "No, it's a couple. Retirement property." "Good. At least there wouldn't be children in that place." "Will you be staying in the area?" she asked. "No," I said. "I'm heading back to Denver today. Don't think I'll be back." I walked out before she could ask any more questions, got back in my truck and headed for the highway that would take me down the mountain, out of these woods, back to the city and noise and people and lights. As I drove, I kept checking the rearview mirror. Nothing but empty road behind me. The farther I got from the cabin, the easier I breathed. I'd made it. I'd survived. By following the rules and getting lucky, I'd escaped what had taken Mackenzie Gibson and eventually Rowan too. The highway stretched out ahead, winding down the mountain toward the plains. I turned on the radio, cranked the volume, and rolled down the windows. Let the wind and music blow away the last 6 months. I wasn't looking back. Not at the cabin, not at these mountains. Never again.